Hey everyone, welcome back. We're gonna do something a little different today and dive into learning English with podcasts.
Oh, wow.
Have you ever thought about like why they're so effective for learning languages?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, it's almost like you're just immersing yourself without even realizing you're studying.
Yeah.
It's kind of like eavesdropping on a conversation and you pick up all this like natural rhythm slang, even like humor.
Mm.
It's way more than just vocabulary.
Yeah, and for like someone like you who's got like such a busy schedule, I mean, podcasts are like so flexible.
Oh,
You,
totally.
you can listen while you're working out or commuting or just like chilling at home.
Exactly. It's all about that consistent exposure, even if it's just like little bits here and there. But
Right.
let's get into specifics, right? So we're doing a deep dive today into an episode from this YouTube channel, Podcast Speak English.
Okay.
And it's called English Learning Podcast Conversation, episode 16. It's for beginners season 2.
Okay. And it's about going to the eye doctor,
Yes.
which sounds kind of random.
It does sound random.
Right.
But honestly, I was cracking up through this whole episode. It's actually really entertaining,
Okay.
which I think that's important too, right?
Yeah.
Because humor is huge for language learning.
Yeah.
When you're laughing, you remember things so much better.
Right.
And it just takes the pressure off and makes it fun.
Totally. So tell me about this episode.
Sure. So they structure it really well to maximize learning.
Okay.
So they start by giving you some key vocabulary words and phrases.
Okay.
And then they weave all that into a dialogue between a patient and the eye doctor.
So it's not just like memorizing words, you're actually hearing them.
Yes.
Like in a real conversation.
Yeah, you pick up on those subtle nuances, the
Mhm.
intonation, even cultural cues.
Right.
It's like a mini masterclass in conversational English disguised as a trip to the eye doctor.
I love it.
Oh.
Okay, so what were some of the words they focused on?
So they had a bunch of everyday words and expressions that you would hear in a real situation, especially about vision.
Okay.
Like blurry, to describe when you can't see clearly prescription. That's for the doctor's orders. And even an idiom like blind as a bat.
Oh, yeah. I love that one.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder, like, is focusing on specific vocabulary like the best way to learn a language? I mean, there's so many words out there.
That's a great point, actually. While learning individual words is important, what's even more important is understanding how to use those words in context.
Right.
And this podcast does a great job of showing that.
So it's not just about memorizing lists.
Right.
It's about seeing how they're used in sentences and dialogues and like actual scenarios.
Exactly. And that's where the real learning happens.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so it sounds like this episode isn't just teaching specific words, but also like broader language learning strategies.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about how they kind of weave those in.
So they use techniques like repetition and active recall, which are really good for helping you remember things.
Okay.
Like after the dialogue, they have a whole section where they break down the key phrases and explain what they mean and how you can use them in different situations.
Right, so you're not just like passively listening, you're actually like engaging with the language.
Exactly. Active engagement is key.
Yeah.
And they even take it a step further with this fun challenge for listeners.
Okay.
They ask you to identify the technical term for not being able to see colors.
Oh, that's interesting. So they're getting you to think critically and like apply what you learned instead of just like absorbing information.
Exactly. And framing it as a challenge makes it more engaging and memorable.
Right.
Do you remember the answer, by the way?
Let's see. Inability to distinguish colors.
Yeah.
Color blindness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You see, even just talking about it helps reinforce that vocabulary.
Yeah, it's amazing how like these small details can make such a big difference.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the techniques themselves, it's about the way they're presented.
Yeah.
This podcast does a really good job of mixing education with entertainment. So you stay interested, but you don't feel like you're in a classroom.
Right. It's like they figured out how to make language learning fun and accessible.
Yeah.
I bet there are other English learning podcasts out there that do similar things.
Oh, for sure. There's a ton of podcasts out there for all kinds of learners and interests. Like you can find podcasts on true crime history, even pop culture.
That's cool.
So you can learn English while exploring something you're passionate about.
So it's about finding something that you're actually interested in and that makes you want to keep listening.
Exactly when you're actually engaged, the learning just happens naturally.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of what we were talking about earlier, the importance of like consistent exposure.
Right.
Even if it's just for like 15 minutes a day, it all adds up.
Exactly. Consistency is key. The more you immerse yourself, the faster you'll learn.
But it's not just about learning English, is it?
No, not at all.
I mean, these principles of effective learning can be applied to like it, anything you're trying to learn.
You're right. Like, think about learning to code or play an instrument, even cooking.
Yeah.
It's the same idea, right? Breaking things down, using examples, and making it fun.
Right.
Just like they use stories and humor to teach English. You can find ways to do that with anything you're trying to learn.
So for you listening, what does this all mean? If you're trying to learn English, podcasts are like a goldmine.
Oh, yeah.
They're free, they're easy to access, and there's just so much to learn.
And even if you're not learning English, pay attention to the way this podcast does things.
Right.
Think about how you can use storytelling, repetition, humor, and active learning for anything you want to master.
It's all about finding what works for you and making learning fun.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the good stuff, but I'm curious, are there any downsides to podcasts or things listeners should watch out for?
That's a good question. I mean, podcasts are great for listening and vocabulary, but it's important to remember it's just one part of the puzzle.
Okay.
To really learn a language, you got to work on speaking, reading, and writing too.
That makes sense. So podcasts can build a base, but you got to practice other skills too.
Exactly. And another thing is it's easy to just passively listen without really engaging with the material.
Right.
To really get the most out of it, you got to pause, rewind, take notes, and actually use the new words and phrases you learn.
So be an active listener, not just a passive one.
Right.
So speaking of active listening, what's one thing you'd recommend our listener do after this deep dive?
I'd say go explore the world of English learning podcasts and find one that speaks to you.
Yeah.
There are so many options out there, from news and current events to storytelling and comedy.
Right.
Just find something you really enjoy listening to, and the learning will feel effortless.
That's great advice. And remember, it's not just about finding the perfect podcast. It's about engaging with it, taking notes, practicing speaking out loud. And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah, mistakes are just opportunities to learn.
Exactly.
And remember, have fun along the way. Learning a new language should be an adventure, not a chore.
Well said. Okay, so that wraps up another deep dive.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this exploration of learning English with podcasts.
Yeah.
And that you got some useful ideas for your own learning journey.
Until next time, keep those ears open, those minds curious, and never stop learning.